Hi everyone, and welcome to another video here on my channel. Today we are looking at ChartMogul. This is one of my go-to subscription analytics tools. It is fantastic if you have data in Stripe, especially around subscriptions, of course, iOS in-app subscriptions, Android in-app subscriptions, and any other sort of variation of it. Now let's jump right into the tool. Once you create an account, you logged in, whatever you do, typically ChartMogul gives you a trial of some sort. I think it's either 7 days or 14 days. The first thing we need to do to get ChartMogul going is to import data. So we have to come into settings and then into sources, and you're gonna get a screen like this. Now here we already have some existing data. We can see we have Stripe data and iOS data in particular. But if you go through the import process here in the top right, you get a couple options. Typically you're looking at subscription data. Let's look at that. Then you get other options. So we have integrations. This is by far the easiest way to get data into ChartMogul. So you're going to connect your Stripe account, for example, right? You authenticate using a single sign-on in the case of Stripe. And then ChartMogul can then go in and pull out all the data in a one-time process, and then it's able to update it either in real time or some kind of frequency. You can also just upload data from a file. This is typically going to be a CSV, perhaps that you export from your subscription data source. The downside here, of course, is this is not automated. You will need to keep doing this regularly. And there's a third option, which is just the API. There is a way to just send data to ChartMogul directly through an API. I've actually never done the API integration. I have done some manual CSVs in some cases when I need to bring in one-time data, but the bulk of my work has always been with the actual integrations. So if we click this, you're going to see the different options. So no surprises here. Stripe is likely one of the most popular options. I see Recurly myself. Then you have ChargeBee, PayPal, Braintree, Go Cardless. These are all sort of the classic web subscription platforms. You have iOS here. There's Google Play. There's Google Sheets. I guess it's possible that you might be able to automate data into Google Sheets and then pull it from Google Sheets. That's possible. I guess it really depends how much data you have. And then down here, we have a couple other integrations. For example, we may have QuickBooks and Xero. Some of this can be helpful in terms of bringing either more subscription data or some enrichment. So if we select Stripe, you're going to go through a single sign-on. For iOS, for example, there's usually a token that has to be generated. You do want to become familiar with every source, and every source has instructions. If we actually go into the App Store, and we go here, source configuration, you'll see that it'll give you instructions on how to connect the App Store to ChartMogul. In this case, you have to go in, you have to generate this access token by following the steps. You plug in the access token, and then ChartMogul is able to connect. Stripe has a single sign-on. Google Play actually has two options. You can do the equivalent of a token, or you can actually build a custom integration. I would highly recommend the token option. So every source has a few. Generally, though, the steps are pretty simple. It takes maybe a few minutes to do it. It is not very complex. The benefit of the automated integrations is obvious. They are maintained by ChartMogul. They can be highly reliable. I have accounts in ChartMogul that have been running for multiple years, and the data is just rock solid. Even if there's issues in the syncing, it typically resolves on its own. And in the worst case, you just have an option to resync data manually by just clicking a button, and it resyncs it for you. So once you have your data in, it's going to take ChartMogul some time. Usually the first import might take 24 hours, maybe up to 48 hours, depending on how much data you have. But once you have data, then ChartMogul will do a bunch of stuff behind the scenes to organize the data, clean it, and get it set up. Let's move on to destinations here. A lot of the work happens inside ChartMogul, but if you want to send data out somewhere, there are destinations, for example, data warehouses like BigQuery, Snowflake, Amazon Redshift, and so on. I find the BigQuery destination, just like data warehouse destination in general, has actually been very helpful. You get all the data out from ChartMogul, processed by ChartMogul, so it gets organized and clean in terms of churn and monthly recurring revenue and so forth. So this is very handy if this is something that's going to be relevant to you. One more thing to note on the data source portion here is your subscription analytics settings. The biggest issue I see with ChartMogul is that there's different settings in terms of how things are calculated. For example, how churn gets recognized is going to be at the end of the billing period or the service period or when it actually happens. So you want to double check the settings and how they compare to either your Stripe settings or your iOS settings. That tends to be the biggest source of discrepancies. There's no right or wrong here. It's just understanding what each of these settings means, when churn gets recognized, how free customers are handled, what happens to past due subscriptions, how refunds are handled, and so forth. And that will then give you a way to compare data accurately. Though I would say generally, if you're going the ChartMogul route, you should connect your iOS data, your Stripe data, Google Play data, and then you treat ChartMogul as your source of truth. The other thing I want to show you here quickly is every source, if you go back to the iOS source, typically has information around how the source works. You want to become familiar with this. There's a lot of little details and FYIs that will then likely answer questions. For example, for the iOS data, ChartMogul only breaks in 12 months worth of data. That's one thing. Or if you look at how it handles tax, right? There's an option in the iOS and Google Play to separate the developer proceeds. So it takes away the Apple 30% fee. Or if we look at how often data gets reimported, so it does it once a day typically, unlike Stripe, which is nearly real time. So your subscription data iOS may be off by 24 hours or more, maybe 48 in some cases. Sometimes the Apple integration doesn't work as expected. It just doesn't send data. It's not ChartMogul's fault. It's just Apple's fault. But anyway, so every document, especially for the iOS and Google Play in particular, you just want to go through it and kind of look at all the headings and sections and understand, okay, this happens here. What about this? What about that? There's a lot of little FYIs. There's no change or tweak you have to do on your end. You don't have to tweak the Stripe data. You just more for your understanding as to how the data is being processed. And again, generally, if you treat ChartMogul as a source of truth, then you're not really going to have a lot of issues. The issues just come up if you're trying to compare ChartMogul and your Stripe data. There's a lot of little tidbits and details that will make the comparison a little difficult. So let's go into reports here. So right away, again, 24 or 48 hour period, ChartMogul then just spit out a bunch of reports. This is really the magic of ChartMogul, that in a few minutes you can connect your data sources, and then the data itself gets processed, and it will just simply give you a bunch of reports out of the gate. So this is the monthly recurring revenue report. From here, we can start to add filters, right? So for example, we could filter by plans. ChartMogul would actually then group plans in monthly, quarterly, or annual, just by the frequency. And you can create your own groupings, of course, if you want to have specific groupings like all the USD plans versus the Canadian dollar plans and so forth. We have filters around location, like country and region, the currency, when things happen, so when a lead was created or a free trial was started, and so forth. There's quite a few filters out of the box, out of the gate. Down here, the ones that you see have this little icon here. It's like two arrows on top of each other. These are actually custom fields. So you can send custom fields. This is primarily in Stripe. You can store custom fields in the metadata of a customer in Stripe, and then ChartMogul would then pull it in when it gets data. So for example, we are pulling in, or we are storing the Facebook click IDs in Stripe. We're doing the Google click ID as well. This is for both Facebook ads and Google ads paid spending. We're doing the UTM source parameter, some mix panel identifier that we have. So we store all of this in Stripe, and then ChartMogul then pulls it out when it connects to Stripe. And this means that we can actually break any report in ChartMogul based by this filter. So we could actually do a very basic attribution report here in ChartMogul by understanding, here are like the Facebook ads users that we think converted from Facebook. Here are the users that we think converted from Google ads. Here are like referral users and so forth. So this can be really helpful. And then again, it's not about sending it to ChartMogul directly. It's about sending it to Stripe, and then Stripe can pull it. You're able to send it to ChartMogul. I just find it a little bit more complex. And it's a little easier to send to Stripe since you're already integrating with Stripe, of course, right? Whatever your product does from a subscription perspective, it's integrated with Stripe. So you just add in more attributes to that initial existing integration. Once you have your own filters, you can then save them as segments. And then the segments are pre-built filters, effectively. So in this case, this monthly plans, annual plans, these are actual filters that were created at some point. Let's do that. Add it again. So just a really handy way to be able to share this with other people. Down here, then you can do some comparisons, some tweaks to the chart itself. Generally, the visualization is, I would consider, pretty good. It's pretty basic. You're adding filters and so on. You're not doing a very deep, complex analysis here, but that is completely fine. The point of ChartMogul is to give you all this data right away in a format that's very easy to use. And if we remove all of it, then we get some general numbers here below around what is the new business MRR, the expansion MRR, churn, and so forth. You see the dollar amounts, and then the amounts here are actually the number of users or subscriptions. And if you actually click into any of them, then you actually get a list of emails below. A couple other things. Again, right, you can see there's a lot of pre-built reports around free trials, the trial to pay conversion rate. This is honestly why I think ChartMogul is so awesome. Such a really easy integration, and then all the stuff out of the box. Trying to do this yourself, if you were to take your Stripe data and sort of do it on your own, would be very difficult. So now we have maps, just taking, again, all your data and putting it into some kind of geographic map. And then we have cohort analysis for the churn rates, comparing from month to month, week to week, and so forth. Again, all out of the box, very easy, very powerful. Then we have dashboards. Again, these are typically done out of the box for you, and you can create your own dashboard. So you might create a specific chart with specific filters, and you list them here in a dashboard that everyone can access. And this is all, again, just given to you and from here, and then you have a really good sense. ChartMogul in particular becomes very helpful once you have multiple sources. So if you have not only Stripe, but you have the iOS and you have the Android, and you want something where out of a glance, you can see this is how many subscribers we have, this is the monthly recurring revenue, this is how many free trials we had in the last 30 days, the trial to pay conversion rate, and so forth. This is all just given to you in a single place in a highly reliable way, just because that integration itself can be highly reliable. It is not done manually unless you go the API route. In that case, you do have some kind of manual integration. You do want to think about the reliability of that manual integration. All right, quick break before we go on to the second half of the video. If you are looking for help with data to integrate tools like ChartMogul, but really a bigger data stack, get in touch. You can go to my website at rubenjagarza.com/analytics. I work with a handful of companies every year and help them set up their data stacks, which include ChartMogul in many cases. If this is not you, then a like or a comment is greatly appreciated for the video. There's no ads on the video, so I hope you're enjoying this. With that being said, let's jump back in. Okay, a couple of things. I find benchmarks to be kind of interesting. ChartMogul takes the data from other ChartMogul accounts, and this is saying over 2,500 active ChartMogul accounts, and it gives you some benchmarks based on your industry and based on where you are. I don't use this that frequently, but it can be a handy way to compare yourself within your industry against other peers. There's not that much detail as to where how the data looks, but it's something to think about. Then we have customers. You take all your customers here, and then you're able to show them in a single place. You can actually export data here with all your customer data. This is actually surprisingly very helpful because, again, it's a single place where you can export all the customer data with all the columns, not just the ones you're seeing here, but every single column possible. So it's a very handy way to get access to your entire customer base in a couple clicks, and then get a CSV that you can then take for a deeper analysis. If you open the customer profile, we'll see their different transactions, however many transactions they might have, like a free trial transaction, a paid transaction, a cancellation. We'll see their information. And of course, we'll see their any custom fields that are coming from Stripe or anywhere else. Pretty simple. It can be helpful sometimes for debugging and customer support to be able to open the customer profile and then see, okay, yeah, this customer started a trial here, then they upgrade it, then they downgrade it, then they cancel. So it can be handy in that kind of way. There is actually a CRM add-on that this account doesn't have here. You can see here is blanked out. And the CRM add-on then allows you to do notes. And you can see there's buttons here for notes and calls. It basically adds CRM functionality here, which can be helpful for B2B subscription businesses as a way to say, hey, now here's a profile, and here's all the different notes and outreaches and engagements we are trying or going through the single profile. So that can be helpful if that's something that you need from a CRM perspective, and you want to tie it with the rest of your subscription data. Now, the last thing you want to do, you can see the ChartMogul product is just relatively straightforward. It's simple. It's very good at what it does. It doesn't have a lot of extra stuff. So the last thing I want to cover here for you is just the pricing. Generally, there's a free pricing you can see for less than 120,000 annual recurring revenue. That being said, 120,000 annual recurring revenue, great way to get started if this is you. Again, most of the companies I work with are typically in some kind of paid plan, and in that case, we can then estimate it based on your annual recurring revenue. So for example, on an annual billing, if you do a single payment, and you were to be under 3 million annual recurring revenue or less, you'd be paying about $5,000 a year. And you can see how it scales up to 10 million, and then from there you have a custom pricing of sorts. So you can give you a sense as to what this might cost. Monthly billing is of course higher. And there is an enterprise plan, typically for those who are beyond 10 million to perhaps up to 100 million and so forth. Most of the companies I work with are typically here, so we have access to nearly everything. The CRM was not there, but we can connect as many destinations as we want, or in this case, actually 3 destinations, which is typically enough. Something like a web, iOS, Android tends to be very common, so 3 is a good amount. And then some of the advanced destinations like BigQuery and so on are there. So again, simple pricing, but you do want to think about what is your annual recurring revenue and how much you want to invest in a tool like this, how much you want this data, how much you be able to use this data. That's all I have for this video. I hope you enjoyed this short tutorial on how to get started with ChartMogul. It is short, but the tool itself is easy to get started. It is easy to do those integrations, to connect those sources, add destinations if that's something that's relevant to you. Just double check those settings. Again, there's not a lot of things you can tweak in the data settings, but it's more about understanding how they affect your data, and especially if you're trying to do comparisons with the Stripe dashboard or the App Store Connect dashboard or the Google Play dashboard. We looked at some of the data limitations. You just want to become aware of how each source works and some of the caveats. Some of the caveats are typically not limitations by ChartMogul itself, but just limitations by the providers, or Apple actually limits the data it gives out through the API, and then ChartMogul has to work within those limitations established by Apple. And then we look at reports, some of the filters, segments, maps, cohorts, all the stuff that you sort of get out of the box. Within a couple of days of you connecting data, you have all these different reports updated as frequently as possible. For Stripe, it will be in near real time. For iOS and Android, you're probably looking at some kind of 24-hour delay of sorts. And then we looked at some dashboards, some benchmarks, and the customers themselves, the customer profiles. And of course, we finished with the pricing itself for ChartMogul, so you understand what this all costs. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. There's a few links in the description you might find helpful. If you're looking for help implementing tools like ChartMogul and more complex tools in your data stack, get in touch. There's a link in the description called rubenugarte.com/analytics. There's also a link to my book, The Data Mirage, Why Companies Fail to Actually Use Their Data, sold everywhere you can buy books. And with that being said, until next time, talk soon.